Commander Valktar stood at the observation deck of the Galactic Defense Academy, watching the morning intake with the kind of expression usually reserved for someone who had just stepped in something unpleasant. His forearms crossed in perfect symmetry across his chest, the ceremonial battle scars on his chitinous hide gleaming under the artificial suns. 23 years of service, 14 major campaigns, and enough medals to sink a small transport ship. And now, this, humans, he muttered, the word rolling off his forked tongue like a curse. They actually sent us humans. The Academy had trained warriors from across the galaxy for over 2 centuries. Krell shock troopers with their natural armor plating, Thylorian assassins who could phase through solid matter, Mordanian berserkers who grew stronger with each wound they received, elite soldiers, every last one of them, beings who had earned their place through blood, sweat, and superior evolution. And then there were the Deathworlders. Valktar watched the human exchange students file into Formation Alpha, their pathetically soft bodies moving with what they probably thought was military precision. Their homeworld, Earth, was classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, sure, but that just meant they were good at not dying from their own planet's attempts to kill them. It didn't make them soldiers. "Look at them," he said to his aide, Lieutenant Krixtal, who was busy trying to blend into the wall. Bipedal, no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced strength. They don't even have proper reflexes. I've seen galactic standard house pets with better combat instincts. The human squad consisted of 6 individuals, each one more unremarkable than the last. Their leader, according to the files, was someone called Maya Blackwood. Valktar had laughed when he read her dossier. 1.7 meters tall, roughly 70 kilograms of what humans optimistically called muscle, and apparently some kind of specialist in close quarters combat. Close quarters combat. As if any civilized species would be caught dead fighting within arm's reach of their enemies. "Sir," Krixtal ventured, his voice barely above a whisper, "perhaps we should review their individual files more carefully? Some of these exchange students have interesting background notations." Valktar's head snapped around, his compound eyes focusing on his aide with the intensity of a targeting computer. "Interesting? Lieutenant. The only thing interesting about these meatbags is how they managed to develop spaceflight before going extinct. They're from a backwater system that only discovered faster than light travel 50 years ago. 50 years. My grandmother's combat boots are older than their entire space program. The Academy's reputation was built on one simple principle: break the weak, forge the strong. The training regimen was specifically designed to push cadets beyond their limits, to find the breaking point of each species and then shatter it completely. Only those who could rebuild themselves from the fragments were worthy of the Academy's seal of approval. These humans. Valktar continued, warming to his subject, they got lucky. Lucky that their solar system had rare metals. Lucky that the Galactic Council needed a new trade partner. Lucky that they haven't been invaded by a real military force yet. But luck runs out, and when it does, natural selection takes over. He turned back to watch the humans attempt to form up with the other cadets. Maya Blackwood stood at the front of her squad, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her expression as blank as her future prospects. She was listening to the orientation briefing with the same level of attention she might give to a weather report. 6 months, Valktar said, his mandibles clicking in amusement. I give them 6 months before they're crying to go home to their little blue marble. And that's being generous. The first week of training was everything Valktar had hoped for, and more. The humans fumbled with the standard-issue plasma rifles like they were holding live grenades. Which, considering their track record with the weapons, wasn't far from the truth. Maya Blackwood had managed to accidentally discharge her rifle into the ceiling 3 times during basic firearms instruction. 3 times. Even the Florbonian slug creatures, who had no concept of hand-eye coordination, had better weapons handling. Blackwood. Valktar bellowed across the training yard, and his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally ended the Zentarian Krell War with nothing but a ceremonial blade and sheer bloody-minded determination. Care to explain why your weapon is pointed at the sky instead of the target? Maya turned toward him, her expression unchanging. Equipment malfunction, sir. The trigger sensitivity is calibrated for species with different muscle fiber density. Equipment malfunction. Of course it was. Valk-Tar had heard every excuse in the galaxy during his 23 years of service, but humans seemed to have a particular talent for creative explanations of their own incompetence. He'd earned his reputation fighting the Krell Empire during the Outer Rim conflicts, where a single mistake meant becoming decorative paste on an asteroid. These soft-bodied mammals wouldn't last 5 minutes in real combat. The other cadets were starting to notice. Throcknell, a Krell battle spawn whose family had personally killed over 300 Zentarians during the war, made a point of laughing whenever the humans struggled with their equipment. The Thylorian infiltrators whispered among themselves, no doubt planning some elaborate prank. Even the normally disciplined Mordanian warriors were allowing themselves small smirks of superiority. Perhaps Throcknell suggested during the midday meal, his massive frame looming over the human table, the Deathworlders need equipment more suited to their limitations. Maybe training wheels for their rifles? The entire mess hall erupted in laughter. Every species represented in the Academy found this absolutely hilarious. Except the humans, who continued eating their nutrient paste with the same blank expressions they wore during training exercises. Maya looked up from her meal, her dark eyes meeting Throcknell's three-eyed gaze. "That's an interesting suggestion," she said, her voice as flat as a computer readout. "I'll take it under consideration." That was it. No anger, no wounded pride, no emotional outburst. Just quiet acceptance of the insult. Valk-Tar found this almost insulting in itself. And where was the fire? The righteous fury. Even the most pathetic species usually showed some spark when their competence was questioned. Over the following weeks, the harassment escalated. Training equipment would mysteriously malfunction when humans tried to use it. Their quarters would be searched for contraband at odd hours. Their meal rations would be switched with expired supplies from the emergency stores. Standard hazing procedures, really designed to separate the warriors from the wannabes. Maya and her squad endured it all with the same stoic silence. Valk-Tar began to take personal interest in the situation. As the Academy's senior combat instructor, he had absolute authority over all training regimens. His word was law within these walls, backed by a service record that included the Siege of Krell Prime, the Battle of the Mordanian Gates, and the legendary single combat that ended the war when he defeated Warlord Grix back in personal combat. "You know what their problem is?" he explained to the weekly instructor meeting. "They have no concept of hierarchy, no understanding of their place in the natural order. They come from a world where they're the apex predators, so they think they belong at the top of every food chain." Commander Silneth, the Academy's Thylorian administrator, raised a tentacle in question. "Perhaps we're being too subtle in our approach? Some species require more direct instruction in proper social dynamics." Valk-Tar's mandibles clicked approvingly. "Exactly what I was thinking. These humans need to understand that their little backwater planet doesn't prepare them for galactic reality. They need a demonstration of what real power looks like." The other instructors nodded agreement. The Krell representative showed his approval by slamming his fist through the conference table. The Mordanian delegate simply growled, which in their culture was equivalent to enthusiastic applause. "I'll handle this personally," Valk-Tar announced. 23 years of military service, and these primitives think they can waltz into my academy and pretend to be soldiers. It's time someone reminded them that evolution doesn't care about their feelings. He watched the humans through the observation windows, noting how Maya continued her exercises with mechanical precision despite the increasingly creative harassment from other cadets. Her face never changed expression, never showed frustration or anger. It was almost unsettling. But that just meant she'd break harder when the time came. 3 weeks into the training cycle, Valk-Tar decided it was time for a more hands-on approach to education. The Advanced Combat Simulation Chamber was the Academy's crown jewel, a massive spherical arena where cadets faced holographic enemies in scenarios designed to push them beyond their breaking points. Real pain, real consequences, real terror. The only thing simulated was the enemy's mortality. Today, Valk-Tar announced to the assembled cadets, his voice echoing through the chamber's acoustically perfect dome, We're going to conduct a special demonstration. Blackwood front and center. Maya stepped forward from her squad, her regulation boots clicking against the metal floor with mechanical precision. She wore the standard academy training uniform, adaptive armor that would protect vital organs while still allowing pain feedback, neural interface headset, and full sensory enhancement gear. On her, it looked like a costume she was wearing for someone else's amusement. Gentlemen, ladies, and assorted sentient beings, Balktar continued, gesturing grandly to the crowd of instructors and cadets who were gathering in the observation galleries. Today we're going to see what happens when theory meets reality. When Deathworld arrogance encounters galactic standards. The chamber's holographic systems activated, creating a standard urban warfare scenario. Ruined buildings, scattered debris, and the distant sound of weapons fire. Maya checked her equipment with the same methodical attention she gave to everything else, completely ignoring the growing audience above. Begin standard urban assault pattern, Balktar commanded. Movement drill Alpha 7. And Blackwood? Try not to embarrass your entire species more than absolutely necessary. Maya moved into position and began the exercise. Urban Assault Pattern Alpha 7 was a basic drill that any competent soldier should be able to complete in under 10 minutes. She moved through the holographic cityscape with textbook precision, checking corners, advancing through cover, maintaining proper weapon discipline. And Balktar began his commentary. Notice the inefficient movement pattern he called out to the audience, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's audio system. Humans apparently learned military tactics from watching their entertainment media. See how she's exposing herself to potential sniper positions? In real combat, she'd be dead 3 times over by now. Maya continued the drill, her expression unchanged. She cleared a building, advanced to the next objective, maintained perfect form according to Academy standards. But Balktar was just getting started. The Deathworld arrogance is truly something to behold, he continued, now pacing around the chamber's perimeter like a predator circling wounded prey. They think that surviving on a dangerous planet makes them warriors. But there's a difference between avoiding death and dealing it. Any Krell hatchling could complete this exercise faster. Throk, now watching from the gallery, roared his approval. The Thylorian instructors were taking notes, probably for future harassment strategies. Even the usually stoic Mordanians were showing interest in the spectacle. Maya reached the drill's halfway point, where she was supposed to simulate treating a wounded comrade while under enemy fire. She knelt beside the holographic casualty, her movements precise and professional. That's when Balktar decided to escalate things. "This is pathetic," he announced, stepping into the simulation zone. "Absolutely pathetic. Look at her, fumbling around like she's never seen real combat. In the Krell War, medics had to work while plasma bolts were actually trying to kill them, not playing pretend with light shows." He moved closer, his forearms gesturing dismissively. Her squad would be dead, her mission would be failed, and her planet would be conquered by any real military force. This is what passes for a soldier in human space. Maya completed the medical simulation and stood to continue the exercise. Her face remained completely blank, showing no reaction to the increasingly personal nature of Balktar's abuse. She shouldered her rifle and moved toward the next objective. "Oh, now she's ignoring me," Balktar said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "How very professional. How very military. Except real soldiers respond when their commanding officers are addressing them." The gallery was completely silent now, every eye focused on the drama unfolding below. Even the automated systems seemed to be holding their breath, the holographic simulation continuing around them like background noise. Maya began the final phase of the drill, a simulated building assault that required precise timing and coordination. She moved to the entry point, checked her equipment one final time, and began the breach sequence. Her hands moved with mechanical efficiency, every motion exactly as specified in the Academy manual. That's when Balktar made his mistake. "Enough of this farce," he snarled, stepping directly behind Maya as she prepared to enter the building. "If you can't be bothered to acknowledge your betters, perhaps you need a more direct lesson in respect." His upper right hand shot out and grabbed a fistful of Maya's dark hair, yanking her head back with enough force to make any normal being cry out in pain and surprise. He intended to drag her away from the exercise, to humiliate her in front of the entire academy, to finally break that infuriating mask of professional calm. Maya's response was instantaneous. Without turning around, without changing expression, without even dropping her rifle, her left hand moved in a precise arc that caught Vokhtar's extended arm at exactly the right angle. There was a moment of perfect leverage, a fulcrum of physics and anatomy that every combat instructor in the galaxy would have recognized. Then came the sound. It wasn't quite a crack, wasn't quite a pop. It was the specific, wet, organic noise that joints make when they separate in ways that evolution never intended. Vokhtar's shoulder dislocated with surgical precision, his elbow hyperextended past its breaking point, and his wrist twisted through an angle that made several spectators physically ill. Maya released his hair and stepped calmly into the building to complete her exercise. The silence that followed was the kind of complete, absolute quiet that only occurs when an entire room full of beings simultaneously realizes they've witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. Vokhtar stood there, his right arm hanging at an angle that defied every principle of Zentarian anatomy, staring at Maya's back as she disappeared into the holographic building. His brain, trained by decades of military service to process combat situations instantly, was having difficulty accepting what had just happened. One moment, he'd been in complete control of the situation. The next, he was experiencing pain in ways his species' pain receptors had never been designed to handle. Medical team to combat Chamber 7. Someone was saying over the intercom, though Vokhtar couldn't identify the voice through the red haze of agony clouding his vision. Priority Alpha Medical Emergency. Repeat, Priority Alpha Medical Emergency. Maya emerged from the holographic building 30 seconds later, having completed the drill's final objective with the same mechanical precision she'd shown throughout the exercise. She safed her weapon, removed her neural interface headset, and turned to face the observation gallery where 300 of the galaxy's finest military minds were staring at her in various stages of shock and disbelief. Exercise completed, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's audio system. Time 9 minutes, 47 seconds, all objectives achieved within acceptable parameters. She then looked at Vokhtar, who was still standing there like a broken statue, and added, "Sir, you appear to require medical attention. Should I call for assistance?" The medical team burst into the chamber with the kind of urgency usually reserved for combat zones. Dr. Relixan, the Academy's chief medical officer, took one look at Vokhtar's arm and immediately began cursing in 3 different languages. 2 of them were considered too profane for mixed-species company. How in the name of the first gods did this happen? Relixan demanded, scanning Vokhtar's injuries with a medical tricorder. This isn't combat damage. This is anatomical precision. Someone knew exactly how your joints work, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly which angle would cause maximum damage without permanent disability. Vokhtar tried to speak, but the pain was making it difficult to form coherent thoughts. Maya had done something to his arm that should have required detailed knowledge of Zentarian physiology, biomechanics, and pressure points, a knowledge that no human should possess. The shoulders completely dislocated, Relixan continued, his medical scanner beeping frantically. The elbows hyperextended past the safety threshold, and the wrist by the 7 moons, the wrist has been twisted through a 120-degree rotation. This is surgical-level precision applied at combat speed. The investigation began immediately. Academy security pulled the training footage from 17 different angles, analyzing Maya's movement in slow motion frame by frame. What they found was even more disturbing than the injury itself. Maya's counterattack had taken exactly 1.3 seconds from initiation to completion. Her hand had moved along a trajectory that could only have been calculated with perfect knowledge of Zentarian anatomy and leverage physics. More importantly, her heart rate hadn't changed throughout the entire encounter. "Run it again," commanded Admiral Court Hax, the Academy's director of operations, as the security team played the footage for the 5th time. Focus on her facial expression during the incident. The holographic replay showed Maya's face in perfect detail. Before Valktar grabbed her hair, calm, professional, focused on the exercise. During the physical altercation, calm, professional, focused on the exercise. After dislocating his arm, calm, professional, focused on the exercise. She didn't even blink, whispered Lieutenant Commander Yul Seth from the Intelligence Division. Look at her pupils. No dilation, no involuntary muscle contractions, no startled response. It's like she was expecting it to happen. That's when someone thought to actually read Maya's personnel file. Not the abbreviated Academy version they'd been working from, but the full military record that had been classified under Galactic Council security protocols. What they found turned Valktar's blood cold, assuming he'd had any warmth left in it after the medical team finished pumping him full of pain suppressants. Maya Blackwood wasn't a trainee. She wasn't an exchange student. She wasn't some random human they'd pulled from their military academy. Maya Blackwood was a 15-year veteran of something called the Terran Special Operations Command. Her service record included deployments to 17 different conflict zones, specialized training in 43 different forms of close-quarters combat, and certifications in the anatomy of over 60 sentient species. The reason she knew exactly how to disable a Zentarian was because she'd been specifically trained to kill them. "Keep reading," Admiral Court Hacks ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. The files kept getting worse. Maya had served in conflicts that weren't supposed to exist, in places that weren't supposed to be mapped, against enemies that weren't supposed to be acknowledged. Her psychological evaluation included phrases like exceptional stress tolerance, compartmentalized emotional responses, and ideal candidate for deep cover operations. But the real revelation came when they cross-referenced the other human exchange students with the Academy's database. Every single one of them was special operations. Not just military. Not just combat veterans. Special operations. The kind of soldiers that governments use when they need someone to do things that officially never happened. Elite operators with kill counts that would make a Krell war chief nervous, and psychological profiles that read like instruction manuals for human weapons systems. "They're not here to learn," Admiral Courthax said finally, the words falling into the briefing room like stones into still water. "They're here to evaluate us." Valktar, now properly medicated and beginning to process the full scope of his miscalculation, felt something he hadn't experienced since the Krell War: genuine fear. Not the healthy wariness that kept soldiers alive, but the deep, primal terror that came from realizing you'd been hunting apex predators while thinking they were prey animals. "Sir," his aide Krixtal ventured carefully, "what do we do now?" Valktar stared at the medical readout showing the precise geometric angles Maya had used to dismantle his arm, and realized he was looking at a mathematical proof of human lethality expressed in bone and cartilage. "Now," he said quietly, "we figure out what they're really here for. And we pray to whatever gods will listen that we're not about to find out firsthand why humans call their planet a death world." 6 weeks later, Valktar stood in the same observation deck where this whole nightmare had begun, watching Maya Blackwood conduct an advanced combat seminar for a group of Krell shock troopers. His arm had healed completely, thanks to the Academy's advanced medical technology, but he still felt phantom pain whenever he looked at her. The policy changes had come down from Galactic Command within 72 hours of the incident. The Human Exchange Program was no longer classified as a training initiative. It was now officially designated as a tactical knowledge exchange, which was military bureaucracy's way of admitting they'd been completely wrong about everything without actually saying so. Maya had been promoted to co-senior combat instructor, a rank that had been specifically created for her since no existing academy position adequately described someone who could disable a decorated war hero without changing expression. She now shared authority with Valktar over all advanced combat training, which meant he got to watch her demonstrate techniques that made his species' 1,000-year military tradition look like children playing with toys. "Today we'll be covering close-quarters combat theory," Maya was saying to the assembled Krell, her voice carrying the same emotionless professionalism that had haunted Valktar's dreams for weeks. Specifically, the concept of biomechanical leverage and pressure point manipulation across different anatomical structures. The Krell, Beings whose idea of sophisticated combat strategy usually involved charging directly at the enemy while screaming were hanging on her every word. Throcknell, the same warrior who had mocked human weakness just weeks ago, was taking notes like an academy freshman. Your species relies heavily on natural armor and enhanced strength, Maya continued, gesturing to a holographic display of Krell anatomy. This creates a vulnerability to attacks that bypass armor entirely by targeting joint structures and neural clusters. Observe. She called up a combat simulation featuring a Krell warrior facing a much smaller opponent. Within seconds, the simulation showed 17 different ways to disable a Krell without penetrating their armor. The assembled warriors watched in fascination as their supposed invincibility was methodically dismantled by precise applications of physics and anatomy. Valktar found himself grudgingly impressed. In all his years of military service, he'd never seen anyone explain combat theory with such clinical precision. Maya didn't teach fighting like an art or a passion. She taught it like engineering, as if violence was simply another problem to be solved through proper application of knowledge and technique. The key principle, Maya explained, is that every physical structure has failure points. Armor protects against direct damage but creates predictable stress patterns. Enhanced strength requires leverage points that can be turned against the user. Natural weapons follow anatomical constraints that can be exploited. She was describing warfare the way an architect might describe building construction, breaking down the fundamental principles that governed how living beings could be efficiently disabled or destroyed. It was terrifying in its cold rationality. "Sir," Krixtal said quietly, appearing at Valktar's elbow with his usual talent for moving unnoticed, "the quarterly reports are ready for your review." Valktar accepted the data tablet without taking his eyes off Maya's demonstration. The reports made for interesting reading. Academy combat efficiency scores had improved by an average of 37% since the humans arrived. Injury rates during training exercises had dropped to near zero, despite the increasingly complex scenarios Maya insisted on running. Most tellingly, recruitment applications had tripled as word spread that the Academy was now offering training from actual Deathworld specialists. "You know what the really frightening part is?" Valktar said, watching Maya demonstrate a technique that could incapacitate a Mordanian berserker using nothing but precise finger pressure. "She's not even trying to be intimidating. This is just how humans approach problems. They study them until they understand exactly how they work. Then they figure out the most efficient way to make them stop working." Krixtal shifted nervously. "Sir, do you think the humans are planning something? Some kind of invasion or conquest?" Valktar considered this for a long moment, watching Maya explain to a group of the galaxy's most feared warriors why their traditional combat strategies were fundamentally flawed. "No," he said finally, "I think they're doing something much worse. I think they're trying to help us become better soldiers." He thought about the human approach to warfare, the cold clinical efficiency with which they dismantled problems, the way Maya had ended his military arrogance with a single precisely calculated movement. Humans didn't conquer through superior firepower or overwhelming force. They conquered through superior understanding. "The galaxy's been looking at this all wrong," Valktar continued. "We thought Deathworlders were dangerous because their planet tried to kill them. But that's not what makes them dangerous. What makes them dangerous is that they survived by becoming smarter than everything that wanted to kill them." Maya finished her demonstration and dismissed the class. The Krell filed out, chattering excitedly about leverage ratios and pressure point calculations. She cleaned up her equipment with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else, then looked up at the observation deck where Valktar was standing. For just a moment, their eyes met. Maya nodded once, a simple acknowledgement between professional soldiers, then returned to her work. Valktar felt that phantom pain in his arm again and realized it wasn't really pain at all. It was respect, mixed with a healthy dose of terror at the implications of everything he'd learned. The galaxy's most dangerous predators, it turned out, were the ones who looked like prey.